He was the king of cool, the man who defined rebellion, charisma, and danger on screen. Steve McQueen wasn't just another actor. He was the face of a generation. By the early 1970s, he was untouchable. Every studio wanted him. Every magazine called him Hollywood's most powerful man. He had the fame, the fortune, and the freedom most people only dream of. And then one day, he walked away. No farewell tour, no press conference, no explanation. Just silence. Hollywood was stunned. How could the biggest movie star in the world, the man who ruled the box office, simply vanish when he was at the peak of everything? Some said it was burnout. Others whispered about secret feuds, betrayal, and paranoia. But the truth was far deeper than anyone knew. Because Steve McQueen didn't leave Hollywood for a break. He left to escape it. Behind the sunglasses and the swagger, McQueen was at war with himself, torn between the fame he'd built and the freedom he craved. The studios owned his image. The press dissected his life. Even his closest friends didn't really know who he was anymore. And somewhere along the way, the man who had everything realized he had completely lost himself. In this video, we're uncovering the real reason Steve McQueen turned his back on Hollywood, the truth behind his sudden disappearance, his retreat into the desert, and the dark battle that drove him away from the spotlight forever. Because sometimes the most shocking thing a man can do isn't to crash a car or defy the system. It's to walk away from everything he ever wanted. By the dawn of the 1970s, Steve McQueen was everywhere. His face wasn't just on movie posters. It was on magazine covers, racing jackets, and billboards around the world. Every man wanted to be him, and every woman wanted to be near him. He wasn't acting like a star. He was living as one. His cars were faster, his paychecks were bigger, and his attitude was unmatched. Hollywood had never seen anyone like him, cool without trying, dangerous without speaking. From The Great Escape to Bullet to the Thomas Crown Affair, McQueen wasn't just starring in movies. He was redefining what a leading man could be. When Bullet hit theaters in 1968, it changed everything. The film's iconic car chase through the streets of San Francisco became legendary, and McQueen became something else entirely, the symbol of independence. He did his own stunts, controlled every detail, and refused to follow Hollywood's rules, and audiences loved him for it. By 1970, McQueen had achieved what every actor dreamed of: absolute power. He could pick any script he wanted, demand any salary, and even rewrite his contracts to guarantee control. He became the highest-paid actor in the world, earning millions per film plus a share of the profits. For most people, that would have been the finish line, the proof that they'd made it. But for McQueen, it was the beginning of the end. Because the higher he climbed, the more trapped he began to feel. The endless press attention, the constant demands from studios, the pressure to always be cool. It wasn't glamorous anymore. It was suffocating. He had built an image so powerful that it became a prison. Friends began to notice subtle changes. He'd skip premieres, turn down interviews, and disappear for weeks at a time. When producers called, he'd ignore them. When journalists asked for stories, he'd send silence. The more success he found, the more he pulled away from the world that had made him famous. McQueen had spent his entire life chasing freedom, but now, surrounded by fame, money, and luxury, he realized he had none. And that realization would soon push him to do something unthinkable, to turn his back on the system that made him a legend. Hollywood in the 1970s was a kingdom built on control. Studios owned the actors, owned the stories, and owned the image the public saw. Every move a star made was carefully managed. Every word, every photograph, every performance had to serve the system. But Steve McQueen wasn't built to be owned. From the beginning, he made it clear. He wasn't a company man. He didn't play by their rules. He negotiated hard, demanded creative input, and refused to be typecast. But as his fame exploded, the system pushed back harder. They wanted him to smile more, say less, and show up when told. And McQueen, the rebel, the racer, the man who built his identity on doing things his way, started to feel the walls closing in. He began rejecting scripts left and right. Anything that felt predictable or polished, he tossed aside. He clashed with producers over dialogue, costume choices, and even the pacing of scenes. He was the star, and he knew it. But with every fight, he grew more disillusioned. The creative spark that once drove him was fading, replaced by resentment and exhaustion. To the studios, McQueen had become difficult. To his friends, he was restless. To McQueen himself, he was trapped. He watched as the machine around him turned art into business, actors into products, movies into formulas. It wasn't about passion anymore. It was about numbers, control, and obedience. McQueen wanted none of it. He started showing up late to sets, refusing to give interviews, and sometimes disappearing mid-production. He didn't trust the press, and he hated how his private life was splashed across headlines. Every photo felt invasive. Every handshake felt fake. The more they tried to control him, the more he pulled away. But deep down, it wasn't just the system he was fighting. It was the feeling that fame itself had stolen his identity. McQueen was still the face of rebellion on screen, but off-screen he was a man losing his grip on what that rebellion even meant. And soon, that loss of meaning would push him into isolation, away from the cameras, away from the city, and away from the people who once made him feel alive. Behind the cars, the stunts, and the swagger, Steve McQueen was a man haunted by his own success. Fame had given him everything, but it also took everything from him. He'd once said, "I live for myself and I answer to nobody." But by the mid-1970s, that wasn't true anymore. Every move he made was scrutinized, every word picked apart. The freedom that once defined him had vanished under the weight of expectation. His marriage to Ali MacGraw, one of the most glamorous unions in Hollywood, began to crumble under that same pressure. What started as passion turned into distance. McQueen's obsession with privacy and control didn't just extend to studios, it followed him home. He distrusted everyone, producers, journalists, even friends, believing that everyone wanted something from him. Those closest to him said he'd changed. He grew quieter, withdrawn. The man who once lit up rooms now avoided them entirely. He stopped attending parties, stopped showing up at premieres, and started spending more time alone. Just him and his machines. Cars and motorcycles became his escape, the only places he felt he could truly breathe. But even on the racetrack, where he should have felt free, there was a sadness behind his eyes, a feeling that no matter how fast he drove, he couldn't outrun the emptiness Hollywood had left inside him. Friends noticed that his temper had gotten shorter, his nights longer. He'd vanish for days, then reappear with a 1,000-yard stare. Some blamed fame. Others whispered about old demons, abandonment, fear of failure, the ghosts of a rough childhood he never talked about. And while the world still saw the confident movie star, behind closed doors, McQueen was beginning to fade, emotionally, spiritually, and creatively. He was tired of being Steve McQueen, the icon, the rebel, the brand. He wanted to be himself again, but he wasn't even sure who that was anymore. So he did what few in his position would ever dare to do. He stopped fighting for the spotlight and started searching for silence. By the late 1970s, Steve McQueen had disappeared. No one knew exactly where he'd gone, not the studios, not the press, not even some of his closest friends. One day, he was the biggest movie star in the world, and the next, he was a ghost. In truth, McQueen had escaped to the California desert, a place where fame couldn't find him. He sold his mansion, traded luxury cars for pickup trucks, and settled into a small town where people didn't care who he was. Gone were the tailored suits, the designer sunglasses, the parties. In their place, dusty jeans, a beard, grease-stained hands, and a garage filled with motorcycles. He spent his days fixing engines, riding through the desert, and sitting quietly by a campfire at night. To outsiders, it looked like madness. To McQueen, it was freedom. For years, he'd been living for other people, directors, producers, fans. Out there in the open desert, he finally lived for himself. There were no cameras, no agents, no scripts, just silence, open roads, and the sound of wind across the sand. People who visited him during that time described a man completely changed. The Hollywood edge was gone. He spoke slower, smiled more, and seemed at peace. But there was still something heavy in his eyes, as if he knew this peace had come at a cost. Even while living in isolation, McQueen couldn't fully escape his past. The fame still lingered. People would track him down, hoping for autographs or interviews, and he'd turn them away with quiet frustration. He wasn't trying to be rude. He just wanted to be left alone. He didn't need the lights anymore. He didn't need the applause. For the first time in his life, Steve McQueen was living without pretending, without trying to be anyone else but the man beneath the myth. But while the desert gave him peace, it also gave him time to think, time to reflect on everything he'd built and everything he'd lost. And it was during this time of quiet, away from the crowds, away from the world, that fate would send him one final test. In the stillness of the desert, Steve McQueen found something he'd been searching for his entire life: peace. But fate had other plans. In 1979, whispers began to spread that something was wrong. McQueen had been feeling unwell for months, coughing fits, exhaustion, pain that wouldn't go away. Doctors eventually delivered the news that changed everything. He was sick, and the illness was aggressive. Most people would have returned to Hollywood, sought comfort in fame and fortune. But McQueen wasn't most people. Instead, he retreated even further from the spotlight. He turned down interviews, stopped appearances, and chose to spend his time surrounded by the few people he trusted: mechanics, friends, and his wife, Barbara Minty. Even as his body began to fail him, his spirit didn't. He worked on cars, rode motorcycles, and tinkered in his garage almost every day. He didn't want sympathy. He didn't want headlines. He just wanted normalcy, something Hollywood had never allowed him. When he did appear in front of a camera again, it wasn't for glitz or glamour. It was for passion. In Tom Horn and the Hunter, McQueen returned to the screen as a quieter, more grounded man. His performances were stripped down, raw, reflective, and deeply personal. It was as if he wasn't acting anymore. He was speaking through his characters, showing the world who he really was beneath the fame. But behind those performances, the truth was clear. He was racing against time. In his final interviews, McQueen talked more about faith, forgiveness, and freedom than fame or film. He spoke like a man who had finally made peace with the world and with himself. He once said, "I'd rather wake up in the middle of nowhere than in any city on earth." And that's exactly what he did. Away from the noise, away from the crowds, he faced the end the same way he'd lived, on his own terms. For Steve McQueen, those last quiet years weren't about running away. They were about returning to himself, to simplicity, to freedom. And though his life was cut short, his final chapter wasn't about loss. It was about finally finding the one thing he'd chased since the beginning: peace without performance. When Steve McQueen left Hollywood, many thought he was walking away from success. But in reality, he was walking toward freedom. He had spent his entire life chasing the idea of control over his image, his career, his destiny. But what he discovered in the end was that true control comes from letting go. To this day, McQueen's name still carries a certain magic, that effortless cool, that quiet strength, that rebel spirit that can't be manufactured. He didn't need a red carpet or a studio spotlight to stay legendary. He became timeless by disappearing at the height of it all. His story became a mirror, a reminder that fame doesn't equal happiness, that sometimes the greatest act of rebellion isn't breaking the rules, it's choosing peace over applause. McQueen didn't fade away, he transcended. His legacy lives not just in his films, but in every person who's ever looked at the chaos of life and said, "I need to get out." Because Steve McQueen wasn't just Hollywood's king of cool. He was the man who proved that walking away doesn't make you weaker, it makes you free.